today's episode of Composing Down Under, Australian Voices Composing for Band podcast. And I'm your host, Giovanni, and today we welcome to the discussion Brian Hogg. Yay, welcome Brian.
Yeah, thank
Lovely
you.
to see you. I'd just like to start with maybe a little bit of your background into your life in music and how you came upon it or how music came upon you.
Yeah, wow. It goes back a while. I grew up in a musical family. Dad was a musician, part-time musician, amateur musician. He ended up, after working for most of his life as a boilermaker, ended up working as a instrumental music teacher in schools. So he was a big influence. Initially, taught me how to play. When I came out from England, I was playing sort of tenor horn, wasn't really interested, got over here, started playing cornet for a while. And I started getting really interested in cornet once I got to secondary college. I was at technical school, which has since closed down obviously. Didn't have a music program, and I decided at the end of my year 11 there that I wanted to do music. And I can't really pinpoint why I wanted to change. I was going to be an architect, probably would have made a lot of money or more money. And I decided I wanted to do music. So Dad had gone out to rehearsal. I didn't go to rehearsal because I was studying for exams at the end of the year. And I thought, I want to tell Dad he's probably going to go through the roof because he was working as a draftsman, and that's another interest that I've got off him. So when he came back, I told him, and he said, well, go and organise it. So, okay. We knew the music teacher at Croydon High School, Eric Page. He was the local brass band conductor, and we had done some things with him with the salvo band. So I knew him.
You were playing with the salvo?
I was playing with the salvo band. I was probably a grade 3, grade 4 cornet player at the beginning of year 11 when I went back and I actually did year 11 again. This time just concentrated on the music. And so basically I went from grade 4 through to do my HSC on trumpet at high school. I hadn't done any theory at that stage other than just reading notes. So I got all the theory books I could find over the holidays and just crammed and did Amy B grades 3 and 4 papers, and then I started studying music. So I did 2 years at high school, and that's when I got really interested. Started writing for a few of my friends at school. My first concert band arrangement, I can tell you, was an arrangement of the Beatles' Let It Be, and the high school band couldn't play it because of the syncopations. So I learned that, okay, you've got to simplify those things. But out of that group that went through high school at that time, there was quite a number that went on to be pro musicians. We had a little group. There was 2 trombones, 2 trumpets, and 4 saxophones and rhythm section I started to write for. And that's when I started writing bits. I'd write duets, cornet, trios, and play them on my cornet, and I had a tape recorder and I'd overdub myself. It was lots of fun. Just working out how stuff worked, and why it worked. So then I went, after high school, I did a diploma in music, worked around Melbourne for a while, and I started working as a teacher, instrumental music teacher. That's when you could get into being an instrumental music teacher just on your experience as a musician. So that was 1984. 1986 I went to College of Advanced Education and did Bachelor of Education, majoring in music. Taught in high schools for a while and then started working for the salvos, and that's where I am. So it's a bit of a long journey in some ways. Like I didn't start out studying music till really I was 17. Sometimes I wish I'd started early, but I can't tell you why I made the change from architecture to music. Maybe it was just the fact that I only needed to know the first 7 letters of the alphabet, and I only had to count up to 16 occasionally, and being an architect there was too much maths and English.
Oh. Well, fortuitous that you chose the trumpet. And so from that kind of, I guess what I hear is a lot of self-motivation to be part of music, to teach yourself theory, to arrange without really knowing
what I'm doing.
What you're doing, but
some things haven't changed.
Fine, no, I don't think so. And find those sounds coming together.
I like the whole thing with architecture, and I find it now when I'm doing woodwork, is it's still part of the creative process for me doing the woodwork as writing music is, but I like the way that things come together. And both of those things I enjoy involve problem solving as well. How do you make this piece of music work for this group? How do I make it work for these instruments? And in much the same ways, how am I going to join these two bits of wood together that they're going to stay together, you know? So there's problem solving, and it's all part of the creative process, but I like the way that things come together. I think that's what interested me about architecture, and I still have an interest in architecture. And I like, you know, the construction part of that. So I get so many scores I looked at, and I still continue to, if I get a chance to get a new score, I'll just go over it. So, that's how that works. That's that, yeah. I mean, I'd sit in rehearsal and I'd be playing something, and while I'm resting, somebody else would be playing and said, what's that? So I'd get the score and, that's what that is. Okay. So it's just, I've always been interested in the way that things come together as a whole, you know.
And obviously, when you were starting, you were writing a lot for brass.
Yes.
And so how did you get into the concert band world?
Probably when it was when I started teaching at high school. I mean, I did that one at high school myself for my high school band, which they couldn't play it. And I had that small group, so I was writing for saxes and brass. But writing for, clarinets and flutes and the whole deal, I think the first thing I wrote was Botany Bay. And I wrote that as an exercise to get to know, well, what do I do with all these clarinets and all these flutes, you know? And I still look at that now and think, oh, goodness, why did I do that? It's like looking at drawings you drew at kindergarten with all these stick figures, and you sort of move away from that. And so, well, I just wouldn't do it like that now, you know? And there's some people that really like Botany Bay, and every time they see me, I really like Botany Bay, I thought, oh, please, you know. I've always considered the best piece I'll write will be the next one, because you build on what you've already done and what you've already learned. It's just some things, well, I wouldn't do it that way now, so yeah, we change, and that's what it's about.
What's kind of motivated you to keep that contact with music in your life?
I think for me, even now, it's just the release, it's the self-expression I can find in music and making music. Making music in an ensemble, I think, is really, it's something, unless you play in an ensemble, I don't think a lot of people get what it's really about. Not just the musical part of it, but the community part of it. So, I mean, I've just come from my community band rehearsal, and I love working with those people. I mean, some of them have only started playing in the last 10 years, and I'm one of the young ones.
Just tell us a little bit about the community band.
Okay, we started in 2008 for people who always wanted to play but never did. So the idea was for adult learners to come and play. So out of the band now, we have about 30 people. About a third of them started to play since 2008. There's another third that have been playing as amateurs in brass bands or whatever, for most of their life. And then there's another group of people that learnt at high school, put the instrument away, and then decided to get it out again. I've got one lady who hadn't played her clarinet for 60 years. And so she gets it out, and she's doing really well.
Now, those pads need to be replaced.
Or they've been replaced. Yes. But like, she's doing really well. Now we rehearse in Tacoma, which is right next to Belgrave, She lives in Essendon. So she drives over each week and loves it. But that's what I like. I like the sense of community. And they work really hard. Like we were doing something today that technically was really pushing them. And last time I had it out was a couple of months ago. I said, okay, this is not going to work until people do some individual work. And they had. You know, the thing is, like, working with adults is different from working with kids. In some ways they're the same. The only difference between, I often say the only difference between these adults and my year sevens is the adults are bigger. They still forget how to play G sharp. They still forget to bring, you know, extra reeds or valve oil or whatever. They forget that stuff. But conceptually, they can work on concepts like kids can't. And that's because of life experience. And that's what I really enjoy about it. But for me, it's like if I'd had a really bad day at school, busy day or whatever, I'd just come home, practice for half an hour, and it's gone. It's like nothing else I do, and that even includes woodwork, can dissolve the day and whatever it's brought like music can for me. And it's that self-expression. I can express myself, I think, better musically than I can with any other language, you know. And that to me is the thing that it draws me back to it. And there's very rarely a day goes by where there isn't some tune going around in my head in the background, even while I might be talking to somebody else or doing something else. Like I've had a little idea going around in my head for the last week, and it's going to keep going around in my head until I write it down. I know if once I've written it down, it'll disappear from my head, you know, but it's just nagging me at the moment, so I've just got to write it down. It's just music. It's just, yeah, well, you know what it's like. It's a way of expressing yourself that I just don't find any other way of doing it.
So what is it that drew you towards composing?
I think it's probably a bit of all of that stuff. It's a bit of the constructional thing. How do things work? Writing down a melody that comes in your head. I mean, most of the stuff that I've written, I think I can say most of the stuff I've written in response generally to what I've been teaching with someone. Like some of the level 1 stuff, level 2 stuff has been because I had a school group that I wanted to teach some concepts to. And the last one, Seabreeze, which was only a couple of years ago, I wrote that for this community band. And when I look back, there's quite a few things I've written for this community band, simply because I wanted to teach them something. For that piece, Seabreeze, I wanted something that they could play easily enough that we could actually take. We had a school performance coming up, and I wanted to talk to the kids about melody, what's a melody, and what's a counter melody. So it just came to my head. Tell you, it happened between Walkerville and Inverloch. I mean, 25 minutes drive. I left Walkerville. By the time I got to Inverloch, the whole piece was in my head. And then I just had to write it down. So I got home and I just scribbled it out. Sent it to the publisher, who sent it back, and we made a few changes, and that's fine.
Well, that happens.
That happens, and so it should.
And I'm guessing that kind of starts to outline your compositional process, how you get from an idea to something that's performable. Yeah, I mean, this little idea that's been going around in my head for a week. It's not in response to anything else. It's not in response to me teaching or conducting any groups. It's just a little idea that's in my head, and I think, well, there's something else there. There's something bigger there. What is it, and how can I use it? This week it's been going around in my head, and it's been expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting. I'll work away from the manuscript. In fact, I can remember when the idea came into my head.
my wife and I were sitting down doing some paperwork for the sale of the house, and this little idea came into my head. So I just had a piece of paper and I scribbled out a few staves and wrote that down. And then I started singing it through, and she said, "What's that?" I said, "I have no idea." But she's used to it. I mean, seriously, I've been doing that kind of thing since our honeymoon. Even on the honeymoon, I was writing stuff out. I was up in the middle of the night one night because I couldn't get to sleep, so I just write that down. I still have serviettes, the backs of menus, programs from this and that with notes scribbled on the back of them where we've been at somewhere. And sometimes she just, if I'm writing something on the serviette, she'll look at me and just roll her eyes and think, "Oh, here we go again. It's what you do." You know? But sometimes it's just an idea pops into your head and you've got to write it down. I get a lot of ideas in the car. It's difficult to write it down in the car. So I got in the habit of trying to mentally write it down. And if I can visualize it, I tend not to forget it. Although these days it's just easy to record a message on the phone. I get so many ideas, and by the time I get home, I say, "Oh, what was that?" Because I haven't taken time to actually memorize it. But I find it easier to memorize it if I see it written down, or if I write it down, I'll remember it.
Is there something that you're like pursuing through your composition, or like do you have a sound or a characteristic that makes the composition yours?
I'm not consciously aware of that. I think, I mean, you mentioned Ralph before. I mean, Ralph's a good mate. But when I listen to a piece of music and it's Holgren, his thumbprints are all over it. Same with David Jones, you know, and the same with anybody. Bill Himes, Steve Buller, Jim Curnow. Because we use a language, an oral language, a musical language, that is individual for each person. And that comes out, there's thumbprints all over it. I mean, it's like pick the difference between, I don't know, Haydn and Mozart, because they've got their own thumbprints and fingerprints all over it. It's just the musical language that they use and how they use it, how they develop an idea. For me, it's not, I think people could probably pick something of mine, but I don't know, I like it. And I know it's the same for the other guys. They don't deliberately write those things so people can pick it. It just comes out that way.
Is it hard not to write the same sound?
I must admit, sometimes I try not to write something like what I've written before. But it's even little things like, how do you voice a chord when you've got instruments 1, 2, 3, 4, wherever they might be? How do you actually mix the trumpets with the horns, with the trombones, with the saxophones? And I think each writer will do them differently. It's just the way that maybe it's just the sounds that we like, the sounds that we prefer to hear, and we just do them automatically because that's the way we've done it. Some people are very good at being very individual, and that's just because we're all different anyway. So
are there particular people or composers who've influenced you?
Anybody whose score I've looked at. I mean, I've looked at when Jim Curnow's been out here, we've talked about stuff, and I've looked at a lot of Jim Curnow's. Same with Bill Himes, same with Steve Buller. Anybody, if anyone coming from overseas, I try. So I'm going to talk with this guy, and just pick their brains. But looking at lots of scores of anybody, just to see how people do things differently. But then I'm looking at that from a constructional point of view, and sometimes I think some of my stuff is just constructed in too small a box because that's the way that I work.
I guess following on from that about what composers have influenced you, are there particular pieces of music, or what's on your listening rotation today?
I'm more likely to be listening to Tower of Power, Earth, Wind and Fire, anything like that, There's a few other guys that I like to listen to. There's a piano player, Gabe Dixon, I really like his stuff. I will listen to just about anything. I listen to a lot of that stuff because I find I can listen to it without having to dissect it. If I'm listening to Holst, even though I might have listened to it 100 times, I've got to be sitting and deliberately listening to it. I can't have it on in the background. But when I'm in the shed, Earth, Wind and Fire, Tower of Power, Chicago, Blood, Sweat and Tears, they're on high rotation. Same with some trumpet players. Lots of trumpet players I listen to, just a lot of jazz stuff. That's because I'd like to be able to play it. Like I say, if I'm listening to Granger or Holster or anyone like that, I like to be sitting down and deliberately listening to it. And if I've got the score, I like to pour over it that way.
So you did mention earlier a piece called Botany Bay, and it allows me to ask this question about has your compositional style changed over the years?
I think it has evolved because, like I say, I look back at stuff that I wrote earlier and think, oh gee, I wouldn't do that now. But I think somebody else will have to tell you how it's changed. I don't know if I can actually put my finger on and say this has changed or that's changed.
It's interesting to hear you talk about, though, that ongoing continuous growth as a composer, that your next piece will be your best piece. Is that something does that mean that you're not satisfied with some of the work you've done?
Most of the stuff that I write, I'm not happy with it when I finish it. But that's probably because I've lived with it for too long. If I don't hear it for 12 months and I come back and say, oh yeah, that's all right, that's not bad. It's not as bad as I thought it was. But I get bored very quickly with pieces of music. And that's the same with most things, It's just, if I'm conducting a band, I'll get bored of the repertoire much quicker than the rest of the band will. And that's generally because I've just lived with it for too long. I want to move on to something else. But as for my own stuff, I would like to think there's been changes, but I think somebody else is going to have to answer where and how that's changed. I think I'm critical of my own stuff, but there's a point where I reach where it's like, okay, I've done as much as I can on this, put it away, leave it.
Or give it to someone else. And
and I'm quite happy for it to let go of it, and for anybody to make anything else out of it that they can. I'm always pleased, sometimes surprised, that the stuff that I write people enjoy so much, or don't enjoy. That's fine too. Part of the way that I write, I will, even when I was just scribbling on manuscript, I'll finish for the day, put it away, come back the next day, and I always start at the beginning and go through. And I don't always just add to the end of it. I might, that bar in the middle, that should be this. Yeah, so for me it's part of an editing and a finessing process. So I've already, because I found that very early, like if I write section A and then I come back the next day and write section B, it's got nothing to do with each other. For me, that's not organic enough, So I always go back to the beginning, and then the next bit is, there it is. It's just sort of, that's just the way that I've always done it, and I do that all the time. I go back to the beginning, and then as I'm going back from the beginning, I'll pick up, that shouldn't be that note, what if we did that here and did that there? So there's always that finessing going on. So by the time I get to the end, I'm over it.
You've lived it.
Yeah.
Quite a lot.
And I've just sort of said, well, okay, I'm over it now, just let it go for somebody else.
And you've mentioned a couple of times, but when you start writing on manuscript?
Often. Sometimes lately I've got in the habit of writing straight onto the computer program. I use Sibelius, but I always sketch in Sibelius as I would a manuscript sketch. So I always sketch on 4 or 5 lines, 4 or 5 staves, and then expand it from there. And that's something that I did. It was Jim Kernow I was speaking to. He said just sketch everything. And that takes a while to get used to doing it, but it makes so much sense. But I tend to sketch everything because it's easy to change.
So it's kind of like a quartet or a quintet in.
Basically you've got a melody line, you've got an accompaniment stave, you've got maybe a counter melody line and a bass line, and then maybe percussion. I know Jim Kernow usually sketches everything and then goes back and does percussion later. And I sometimes tend to do that unless there is a timpani solo there, or there is a snare drum solo there. I'll just write it in, and sometimes it might just be a sketch over the top of a line. But the sketch is only for me. Nobody else is going to see it, so it's usually a mess, particularly if I've done it by hand. But it allows. I can remember sketching stuff on the beach at Lawn, and that's one of the advantages of writing with manuscripts. You don't have to have it plugged in anywhere, and it doesn't matter if it runs out, because you can see when your pencil's going to run out. So that's you know, I do a bit of both, and it just depends where I am. If I'm at home, I'll probably sketch straight on the computer. If I'm at somewhere else, I usually have a pencil with me and a notebook, and I'll just scribble some notes, and that'll be the start of the sketch, and then I'll come home and flesh it out from there.
One of the, I guess, staple Brian Hogg scores that a lot of people have listened to or played or conducted would be Louis Non.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us how that piece kind of evolved?
Yeah.
Of course, not necessarily your melody.
No, it's not my melody. That's why it's probably a good one. I was teaching at a school, teaching brass, and I had 3 students, a UFO player and a couple of trombone players doing grade 3 A, M, B. This was years ago. Mm-hmm. And that tune was on the syllabus. So each of them were playing that. And it just got stuck in my head, and I thought, oh yeah, there's some stuff there we can do. I mean, the arrangement was far too hard for the band to play at the time. But that's where that started. And that was one of the first things that I'd actually written. I mean, Botany Bay, I don't think Louis Non was that much later. Mm-hmm. Can't remember now. But it was a fairly early piece. And that's one of the pieces I've been really surprised at. I mean, it's sold really well actually for Brolga. It still continues to sell well.
It does.
Which sort of surprises me. I mean, it's just a fairly straightforward folk song setting. I like setting folk songs, and some of the Celtic and Welsh songs are just lovely. And that's part of my background too in a salvo band, all those old hymns. And that's an old hymn that I've known for a long time. And I think that background of playing in a salvo band and hymns actually does inform a lot of my melody writing. You know, the way that they construct it. I don't think it's something that I deliberately follow, but it's just, there's the model, there's the pattern, and I tend to write like that. A lot of my stuff I would like to think is melodic, because I just like a nice melody. And if it's not a nice melody, well, who wants to hear it anyway? So, but yeah, Louis Non, that's where it came from, and I just started playing around with trying to set that, but trying to set it a little differently, not so it's just not 3 straight treatments of the tune, but more about what the image for me for that piece, that tune, the Ash Grove, which is the English name of the song. In England, where we used to live, there was an avenue of trees, and we would go down there and play soccer quite often, just kick the ball around. I can remember going down there in winter, and it was just covered with snow. We had the soccer ball, and we looked at each other and said, "Oh, we're not playing today." So we went home. But I remember standing there and watching just the moisture rising off that snow, because there was quite a nice sun. And that's sort of the image that I had for that piece. Just sort of this avenue of trees, it's still, it's calm, and it's just, just the mist of the day rising. And every time I go back to England, I go to that spot.
Oh, really?
Because it's in my hometown, and it's just so, it's just memories of the place. and that's something that I was always taught, you know, sort of to find some sort of image in the music you're playing and express that. It doesn't have to be the same necessarily as somebody else, but as long as it comes out the same way, you know. And I think when we listen to music, we tend to think, well, I certainly tend to think in feelings and images, what makes me feel like that. And that I think is one of the things with music, is we're trying to express something. It's not just dots on a page or how many notes somebody can play, but what is it we're trying to express, and how do we express that within the ensemble that we have. And you write stuff, and if somebody else comes along and expresses it a different way, and that's fine, as long as they're expressing something and not just playing it, you know, metronomically and playing it really flat and dull, you know, with no expression. That to me, I think, is worse than anything. Who is it? What's the quote? Everything except that which is essential is on the page. Playing what's on the page is easy. Getting young players and even some adults to play something that is not on the page is often the challenge.
Have you had challenges as a composer that you have had to like confront or overcome when writing a work?
There's been plenty of times you start something and you get halfway through and think, well, this isn't working, throw it out. And I've screwed it up and thrown it out. Or I think, well, I mean, I remember writing something for a group. I think, oh, this is not right for this group. So it just got put in a folder. I've got a really thick folder of old ideas, and I started again. I think if I'm writing something for somebody,
as in a commission,
I like to write something that's going to mean something to them. Mm-hmm. So I usually find out from people a little bit about what it is they want, what kind of style of piece, and if there's any history around the group I'm writing for that make, you know, it's just something that you can hang a musical idea on. Mm. Sometimes it works better than others, I think.
Well, certainly being involved with you in commissioning Gain Wisdom mm-hmm. was such an interesting process. Mm-hmm. And very fortunate that the melody worked out to be in the nice Mixolydian mode. Mm. But it was just so interesting with you coming into the group as well and being with the students and watching you work with them was a very big part of the process for us as the school commissioning.
I can remember driving the car thinking of Gain Wisdom and going G-A, okay, what would I be? Oh, I know it's going to be a B. Okay, all right. You know, and I'm working out while I'm driving the car. And I would often drive the car and, you know, be playing my trumpet, both hands with the fingers down. But yeah, I mean, if somebody's asked me to write something for their group as a commission, I'd like to think that it means something specific for them. And I think sometimes that works better than others. But that's probably, well, it has. That's only to do with my ability to make it something.
That's true, isn't Fanfare and Processional?
Fanfare and Processional was written for my high school band of Burwood Heights, and that was the first school band I conducted. In 85 we started the band, and I was at the school till the end of 89, and we started the band, and the first concert we did, somebody said, oh, the band got a uniform or something, and somebody said, well, why don't we just get a white windsheet, wear black, white windsheet, everyone's the same. And one of the kids designed a little logo, just had the school initials and some notes. And I can remember going home, I was brushing my teeth, looking in the mirror, trying to read these notes backwards, and I couldn't. So I took off the jumper and read, oh yeah, okay, right. And that's what it's based on. Nothing specific with the school, but it was just that logo. Sometimes you get ideas. I like finding a little motive and then developing it as much as we can. And there's so many great examples of that. I mean, the best one I can think of is Mozart's 40th. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum. In the whole development section, there isn't one bar that doesn't have that in. You know, I don't know how many minutes the development goes for, but he goes all the way, I think, from F sharp minor, ran the cycle back to G minor, and it's got da-da-dum, da-da-dum, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. He turns it upside down, he does it in different, he harmonises in different parts of the chord, and he does all this stuff with it. It's just amazing. It's like minimum material for maximum music, you know. So there's stuff like that, and you hear that all over the place, how people take a really simple idea and they can develop a whole piece from it.
What work would come to mind for you from what you've composed that we've done that?
Gain Wisdom would be one of them.
I was thinking Momentum.
Momentum is another one. Oh, Momentum was like...
That was Eric Page.
That was Eric Page, and that's based on his name. And there's only one bar in it that actually has his whole name spelt out. But the rest of it is sort of just taking a little idea and developing it. That's an exercise that I do with kids sometimes at school. Just write down a phone number, and what can you make out of that? It's just something to kickstart, because there's nothing worse than sitting down with a blank piece of paper. You know, so you've got to write something. If it changes, that's fine. If it doesn't change, well, you've got a good idea, and try and develop it from there. And sometimes that could be a really small one bar motive, or it can be something that's much longer. But yeah, it's just the way we work sometimes.
So it's actually interesting talking to you, because of course you weren't born in Australia, but I'm going to ask you this question and see how it comes back to me. Do you think that there is an Australian sound or an Australian voice in band composition?
I'm not sure. Not in the same way that you can say there's an American sound. I think even English, some of the folk songs, particularly some of the English folk songs that have sort of a modal sort of a sound to them, but then a lot of that has just been shipped over here anyway, Botany Bay and all of those tunes.
All of the folk song era.
Yeah,
as
from Australia. The folk songs in Australia are very Celtic and English. I can't think of any that is anything other than that. And then, fortunately for this country, when we, the whole migration thing started, there's influences from, other parts of Europe coming in, but I'm not consciously aware of an Australian sound. Granger would probably be, Granger's Granger. I don't know if you can't say, Granger, that's the Australian sound. No, that's Granger's sound. And some people, I think David Stanhope, sometimes I've listened to David's stuff and thought I'm listening to Granger, right? But I don't think, that's an Australian sound. But then, was Granger Australian? Well, he was, and he wasn't,
But his musical tradition was based elsewhere.
That's right. So it's, I don't know, I'm going to say no. But if I'm wrong, tough.
Who knows? Do you have any advice for those who are hankering to become a composer or to compose?
Write something down and get somebody else to play it. That's all I would say. Get somebody else to play it. If you can start small too. It's actually harder to write a trio than write a duet or a quartet, I think. Trios are much harder. But write small. Most scores you will look at, you can reduce to 4, 5, 6 parts. They look a lot more complicated than what they are. I did a lot of that reducing scores when I was younger. I'd get scores from all over the place and reduce it down to the minimum number of parts. It's a good exercise to see the way that instruments are used. There's a great piece in the salvo repertoire by a guy called Eric Ball, who was one of the doyens of brass band writing. And it's the middle movement out of a 3-movement suite. The whole brass band is playing, and there's only 4 parts. All the cornets are playing, and it's all piano, all pianissimo. All the cornets are playing unison on the soprano part. The flugelhorn and all the horns are playing the altos. The trombones, baritones, all doing the tenor part. The UFO, I think, is doing the bass part along with the basses. It's just straight SATB, straight down the back, and it's all piano. And when it's played well, it's chilling. Like, he could have said, okay, it's piano, it's a slow melody. He could have said, I'll do that for 4 players. But he does it with the whole band, and it's like having all the cornets play is different to having 1 or 2 play. It's a fantastic sound when it's done well, but because it's slow and it's quiet, it's really hard.
What is the work?
Pilgrim's Prayer by Eric Ball. I think that's what it's called. Pilgrim's Prayer. It's the 2nd movement. The 2 outside movements are quite lively, but this middle movement is just a slow melody. It's not terribly long, but when you hear it played well, it's just... But yeah, you look at stuff like that and you reduce it down. Well, that's easy, But the thing is, like, you look at a brass band and you might be looking at 17 individual parts. You look at a wind band, you're looking at 20 odd parts or more. When you just start writing, you sort of think, what do all these people do? How do you make it work? And then you start to say, well, okay, why write trumpet, clarinet and flute all doing the same thing when the flute can do it by themselves, or the clarinets can do it by themselves. Because we start to talk about mixing colours and timbral colours. There's an example in Bolero, I think it is, towards the end, just about the whole orchestra's playing the melody, but different parts of the orchestra's playing on the harmonics of the fundamentals. And so you have this sort of the whole orchestra playing, stacked on fourths and fifths and thirds, stacked up, and it's fantastic. It's just like, oh, that's how you blend colours. But there's examples, a lot of that impression stuff. Just the use of colour is amazing. And I really like the Russian school. Probably my favourite composer is Rimsky-Korsakov. Simply for no other reason is some of his stuff used to get played around the house when I was a kid for so long, and I just got to know it. But the use of colour is amazing, and his influence on the rest of the Russian school is quite impactful. And yeah, you get Stravinsky. Was it last year the MSO did the 3 ballets all on the same night? That was breathtaking. But to see the size of the orchestra he was using, and the colours, it was stunning. But I like the Russian school for the colour. Even you look at Tchaikovsky's use of colour, even in something like the 1812 when it was written, that would have been astounding, being played outdoors with real cannons and real church bells. Wow. Just the way that, how does it all work together, but if you're starting to write something small, because then if something doesn't go right, or you think, oh, that could be better, you don't have a lot to change, and I think to learn to write 4 parts, then you can learn to spread those 4 parts out and write for different choirs within the band, and then mix the choirs up.
And that's kind of what you were talking about before with the sketches, when you're sketching something out in that quartet or 5 or 6 part, and then expanding.
So when I write a melody on a sketch, it'll just be one long melody, and I'll write over the top trumpets, flutes plus trumpets, flutes plus oboe plus trumpets, no trombones, whatever it might be. You make those notes, and that's easy. And a lot of, I think, the more I've been writing, the more I know which instruments I'm writing for straight away. Like that melody is definitely trumpets. That melody is definitely clarinets. But you write the melody down, and then you can assign it to instruments later. And when you're actually fleshing it out for a full score, you can change it if it's not working for whatever reason. Like you're writing something out for the clarinet, and you realise, okay, this is a level 2 piece, and your second and third clarinets are going over the break. No, it's not going to happen. So you change it. You say it's part of the problem-solving thing. But then, where do you write it? Because if I stick it in the second trumpet parts, it's pushing them a bit too. So yeah, you've got to solve those things. And
so there are the additional issues of writing. Certainly, if you writing at lower level ensembles who have less skills or less range or less rhythms, to think about how your piece.
That's much harder to write a level 1 piece than it is a level 5 piece. Because you write a level 5 piece, you don't have to worry about what you write. I've done a lot of things for the Salvo's staff band. That's the only band I write for where I don't care what I write. I don't think about the key signature. I don't think about the range. Okay, yeah, cornets can play that top C. I don't care for the second cornets, they can still play that top C. And the band, yeah, they can play in 5, 6 sharps, that's okay. They don't like it, but they've got used to it. And particularly if it's an accompaniment for a singer, singers pick the most ridiculous keys. That's the key it's got to be in. But you can't write that for beginner kids. So writing for beginner kids, and some guys do it really well. Writing for young band, that it doesn't sound like it's being written down. Some guys do it. Kenyon was perfect, and I was really fortunate at the first school I was teaching at. They had a whole drawer full of Don Kenyon stuff, and it was magical. You know, all this short score stuff that he used to write, and that's where I said, oh, that's how that works. Oh, that's what you do with flutes and clarinets. That's brilliant stuff to look at. And yeah, I mean, it's only sort of 5, 6, 7 staves or whatever it might be for a full band. And the way that he, you know, basically anything longer than a tenor saxophone is playing the bass. And then, you know, your horns and your altos are often doubled up. But that's not always the case. But there's lots of examples around. I would say if you're interested in writing, you get as many scores as you can and you just look at them. You find someone who you trust and say, what do you think of this? And get some feedback. And most important, get it played so you actually can sit back and listen to it being played. Don't play in the ensemble. Sit and listen to it being played. And then ask people in the ensemble, any problems with your part, you know? It's a little bit like when you go to reading day and someone will say, well, this second clarinet part goes over the break and, you know, this is doing that, and, you know, and that's fine, because when you're picking music for young bands, you want to know those things. I used to drive people nuts when I was picking stuff for my school band, because I would pore over the scores. I'd sit in the shop for hours poring over the scores. Oh, yeah, my flutes can cope with that, clarinets can cope, alto saxophones, they're never going to do that one. Okay, put that one away. And it may have only been a couple of bars in the piece, but I just sort of, well, I've got to get stuff that suits my group, that they're going to have success playing. I don't want the kids to have to practice and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice and only play one piece for the whole term, you know.
Can I go back just for a second to something when we were talking about the Australian sound? You said that there was an American sound. What do you hear as an American sound?
Copeland.
Yep.
You know, that I think Copeland really nailed it, and you can hear that influence from Copeland in lots of stuff post Copeland. Mm-hmm. Even now, even in some film music, you'll hear that sort of those open fifths, fourths, and things, particularly melodic lines. Listen to John Williams. What is it? Saving Private Ryan. Mm-hmm. That hymn is gorgeous, but there's elements of it that's sort of like, yeah, that's written with an American ear, you know, and a lot of his stuff. He writes amazing material, but you can sort of, you know, even Star Wars, you say, okay, that's got Holst all over it, you know, and that's fine. Or is it that imitation is the best form of flattery? Yeah, for me, it's sort of like some of the sounds that Copeland was getting in particular, and other composers around that time, Appalachian Springs. How
has that manifested itself within concert band?
I think it's the similar sort of sounds. It's also almost a sparseness about it. Mm-hmm. Some guys at the moment, some American guys at the moment are writing great stuff for young bands. Standridge, Mendel Standridge, Patrick Rosell, Autumn Rains. Mm-hmm. That's gorgeous. Yet it is not simple. And it's quite linear. I think that's another. I think the difference between, if you're listening to an English military band, lots of doubling up. So oboe will be doubled in cornet, horn will be doubled in saxophones, because they generally had smaller groups, and when they play it outside, they would not necessarily have the full range of instruments. But in America, they have their military bands are generally full instrumentation, and therefore you actually have more colour. You don't have to double up. If you want to have an oboe solo, you have an oboe solo. You know, if you write an oboe solo for something over here, you better cue it somewhere else, or you know, whatever it might be. French horn. You know, your French horn, just double it somewhere else. It's got to be, if you want it played, it's got to be played by more bands.
Except when you write in stillness.
Yeah, all right.
I'm just going to pick on you there.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry about that.
But at the same time, that piece could not be doubled.
No.
The opening of that is French horn.
that's one of the few pieces I've written that I've really just written for me. It's one of the pieces I just had to write. And it actually took a while. It took 6 or 7 years actually.
Wow.
It got chewed up and spat out and thrown out so many times, and I'd keep coming back to it, and finally I settled on it. And the reason I settled on it is I was going to do SHEP up in Queensland, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have it finished so I can do it then. So I finished it, sent it up there, and they said, yeah, happy for you to do that. Yeah, I think that's the thing. If you write, whatever it might be, a solo here or there, if it is cued, if it's cross-cued, more groups are going to play it. But if you only want that French horn or that oboe or that saxophone to play it, don't cue it anywhere else. But you have to be aware that some bands don't have those instruments, so they're not going to play it. So they're not going to pick up your music. If they don't pick up your music, you don't get paid. It's simple.
It is simple. It is. So just finishing up then, thinking about what would be something that you would like performers of your music to know that they may not know?
Find the shape in the phrase. And whether that's in an accompaniment line, it might be in a counter line, it might just be in the accompaniment itself. Find shape. And it might be really subtle. It doesn't have to be big crescendos or anything like that, but it needs to have shape. But that to me is just playing musically. And I don't care if people take things at a slightly different tempo than me. That's fine, as long as it's not ridiculous. But that's the way I think it should be. I mean, other people should be able to interpret the music differently. That's what makes different performances better or not better. But when I listen to any performer in any style, I don't listen to how fast they can play, how high they can play, how long they can play in one breath. I just listen. Can they tell me a story? Can they tell me something? Can they express something with this song? I respond to their expression, not their technique. So sometimes when, particularly school bands, we push technique, and that's fine, because if you don't have technique, you're not going to be able to express anything. But the expression is more important than the technique. The technique is only there to help us express something. So for me is just find some expression in the music. And if you express it differently to me, that's fine. That's the way I think it should be. That's what makes music. And that it's an art. And it's not a science in that everything has to be exactly this or that. We've got to learn to express something. And I'd like to think that most of my stuff, if not all of it, people can express something in a melody and encourage particularly young kids and older people just to be expressive. That's what music is.
Words to live by, Brian Hogg. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your insight into your compositional life and also your musical life in general. It's really fascinating to hear where you've come from and how that evolves. Thank you so much for giving us some time to interview, and we will be in touch.
Pleasure.
Thanks very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Composing Down Under, Australian Voices Composing for Band, sponsored by Brolga Music Publishing, Australia's finest musical voice.